Hi Bio20, welcome to chapter 2.1. We're looking at water today with some familiar concepts that you may have heard of in Science 10 as water properties was discussed in there as well. It's 50% or more of all plant and animal tissue, and our body is about 74% water, so it's a big deal in our body, has lots of uses. 97% of the water that's on our biosphere is in liquid form. We've got vapor in the atmosphere. We've got transpiration, evaporation, sending it up there. 86% of our evaporation, though, is from the oceans, of course, because of the large amount, 74% of the globe being covered with the oceans. If there's water made in the body because you are doing cellular respiration, that's called metabolic water. And interestingly, water is one of our greenhouse gases. The water cycle is something that is very familiar to most people. Basically, we've got water that's going up into the air from plants, that's transpiration, or from the ocean, evaporation. And as it condenses, forms clouds in the sky. Those clouds will eventually precipitate as either rain or snow or sleet, and that precipitation will either go right into the ground or above ground and go into the waterways. So we have some that could be underground or surface, but eventually it's all flowing to the ocean and starts our cycle again. Pretty simple cycle. A couple other things about water. We've got currents, ocean currents that actually have a big impact on climate because those currents are always flowing with our water that's warmed at the equator, sending that water up to northern areas, and the cold water that in red here, the cold water in blue, I just said the red is going up, warm water going up. The cold, I have to change colors, I think that would make sense. The cold water that is in the blue arrows, so coming from northern areas, it's flowing down. And so there continues to be a mixing. This is the Antarctic here. So we've got the cold coming up from the Arctic, but from the equator, we have that, go back to purple, that warm water that is going up and down from the equator, and the cold that's coming from Arctic and Antarctic. But that flow continues to move around water around the globe and moderates that water around the globe, so it's always mixing. The next thing we'll talk about is how water is a universal solvent and dissolves many materials in it, including the nutrients and gases that it dissolves in, carries in our blood. Water has a relatively high boiling point, high melting point, high adhesion, meaning sticking to its own molecules, making droplets, and also high cohesion, sticking to other things. So you pour out a plastic container of water, there's still some left because it has cohesively stuck to the plastic, so you can shake it out and a little more comes out. As well, water has a high heat capacity compared to other things, and you guys remember from physics that is 4.19 and that joule per gram degree Celsius, so that is considerably a high heat capacity. It holds on to a lot of heat. You can put a lot of heat into water before it goes up a degree Celsius. The reason it's a universal solvent is because of the hydrogen bonding that's in there, and it becomes a polar molecule, meaning one side is more positive, where the hydrogens are, because they'll stay on the one side, and the other side will grab those electrons to fill the oxygen's outer ring, and so that'll end up being more negative on the oxygen side and more positive on the hydrogen side. But because it's polar, that means it'll mix very easily with anything molecular, as well as ionic compounds that will break into a positive and negative ion. It's going to have a way to attach to and stick to many different things and dissolve them. In terms of the high melting point and boiling point, they go back to looking at that same concept of the hydrogen bonding, because those bonds are strong, and the hydrogen bonds are the bonds that are because the negative oxygen of one molecule is attracted to that positive hydrogen of the next one. So the hydrogen bonding is where one molecule of water is attracted to another one, and so they're attracted to each other. So that is why takes a lot of heat to break those bonds and melt them or boil them, and it's why they have a high heat capacity as well. And so lots of cool features of water. When it's frozen, it has this crystal structure, and so that's kind of cool, but that also is giving it some interesting features, like the fact that it is most dense when it is 4 degrees, and so the 4-degree water will fall to the bottom of a lake, and that is a very very positive feature, because the lake generally will not freeze to the bottom, because the bottom will not be ice cold water that's sunk to the bottom. It will be 4-degree water, which will keep the life at the bottom having a place to swim around in, and it generally lakes will not freeze right to the bottom. So they show you here that it is 4 degrees Celsius here when water is the densest, and so what will float above that is water that is a little colder or warmer than that. It's going to be floating above that 4-degree water. So we also see, you may know this, that as water is warmed up, it just like when you boil water and see bubbles released, there is more oxygen in colder water, which is why really cold water has more trout in it. So as the water gets warmed, those bubbles coming off of it have oxygen, some oxygen in there, and so it holds less oxygen as it gets warmer. In terms of nutrient cycling, we know that this 4-degree water is at the bottom, and so in the spring, when the top is warmed until it's 4 degrees, from ice to 4 degrees, when it hits 4 degrees, it's going to sink to the bottom and taking any dissolved oxygen from the winds and stuff down to the bottom, and gets fresh oxygen to the bottom from where they need it, because in the winter months probably there was a depletion of that oxygen. And on the other side, in the fall, when it's been a warm water season, but in the fall that water gets 4 degrees again, it does the same thing. It's called spring and fall overturn, and that 4-degree water will do the same thing in the fall down, and it will take that oxygen down to the bottom before winter freezes it over. So there's that spring and fall overturn, which is great, and it's because of that feature of densest water being 4 degrees. With cohesion and adhesion, we know that cohesion is what gives water a high surface tension, and those droplets give it a almost this film on top that's very tough. So that's why insects and stuff can walk like this, the water strider, walk on water because of high surface tension. And adhesion is when it makes little droplets, and it also says that adhesion is what helps to move water up in the xylem of vascular tissue of plants. As water moves up, it's because it's adhering to each other. Okay, the heat capacity is also because of hydrogen bonding. I feel like we talked about that already. And there's a couple of little things here about stories about how drought in the dirty 30s happened, and that less water caused a lot of problems with all these windstorms historically in our province. And I think that is actually, I thought there were two stories. There's only the one. Okay, so this last picture is about stomata, the little openings underneath leaves that will release water as the plant does transpiration, and will also take in carbon dioxide for photosynthesis, but also oxygen for cellular respiration. So this is a picture of the stomata. If you zoom in, you can see that they're right there underneath the leaves. These are stomata that are closed, so it doesn't always lose water, but sometimes stomata are opened when gases are being exchanged. Alrighty, that wraps up first topic 2.1, and stay tuned for 2.2 coming soon.